All right, well, when I was an assistant instructor at the Tom Rose School, one of the biggest factors that separated the students that did very well and would graduate and would go on to continue doing great things within the dog training profession and the ones that did not, aside from their work ethic, was their ability to understand and properly use markers. Markers are huge. I talk about it all the time on my channel. And so today we are going to be doing a quick analysis, really just getting the gist of the episode. And then we're gonna go over some Q&A. I'm gonna be answering the questions that have been posted by my channel members, and then we're gonna go into additional Q&A for anybody who's currently watching. So in the episode, if you have seen it, it's about clicker and marker dog training. The first thing that I do is I talk about how much time we have to influence a dog's behavior. It's been scientifically proven that we have approximately 1 second. Now you may hear some dog trainers say 1.3 seconds. I've tried finding any sort of scientific data that supports that, and I have not been able to find it. That's why I started to say roughly or approximately 1 second, depending on the dog. Some dogs are going to be different. Now, if you guys will just give me 1 minute, I'm going to pull up the live Q&A on the computer as well so I can see when questions are coming in because I'm filming it on my phone. Since I haven't been able to find any supporting data on the 1.3 seconds, if we look at it as 1 second as a guideline, that helps us quite a bit. Now, the next thing that I talk about is the difference between a primary reinforcer and a condition reinforcer. Remember, the primary is what we are actually using or giving to the dog. That's going to be part of that 4 quadrants of operant conditioning, your positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment. So a condition reinforcer is the word or sound that we use that predicts the primary. I also talk about Ivan Pavlov. Now in the video I pronounced it as Ivan Pavlov. It's Ivan Pavlov, and he was a Russian, I think in one of my videos I said psychologist, but he wasn't a Russian psychologist, he was a physiologist. That's what he was. And he came up with the whole concept of classical conditioning. Now, what I said in the video was he really just renamed a word, and the word that he renamed was predictability. And the reason why I said that was to simply simplify the concept of marker training, because our words mean to our dogs what they predict. Dogs are really good at pattern recognition. They're really good at predictability or understanding patterns based on what becomes predictable. And that's why the markers are so effective. If we have a sound that always precedes the delivery of the reward, then the dog is able to put that together. They hear the sound, they know they're going to receive a reward. This actually brings me to something that somebody asked me the other day. They said, what's the difference between your terminal marker that you like to use, the word free, in comparison to your come when called? They look the same when you're teaching it. We say the terminal marker, and again, you can use whatever word you like. I like to use the word free. I say free, then I move back, encouraging the dog to come to me to get the reward, teaching them that free predicts release and reward by showing them that with my physical body language. After doing that enough times, when we say free, the dog jumps up and they go, where's my reward? Now, when we're teaching come, we say come, then we move back. I like to do a little bowing presentation. The dog walks to me. I lure them into a sit because I like them to be in the sit front position. Once they sit, I mark the behavior and give them the reward. Even if the dog came to me and I just handed him the reward, which you can do while you're luring, because like we talked about at the very beginning of this episode is we have approximately 1 second to influence a dog's behavior. So when we're luring a dog into different positions, if I lure a dog into a sit and give the dog the piece of food within the first second of them sitting, then we made the connection. And dogs actually learn better and faster if we're able to get them the primary reinforcer within 1 second of them doing the behavior we're trying to capture. Same thing with come. If you call the dog towards you and once the dog gets to you, you give the dog the food, you're handing them the primary. So now the difference between the two, even though they look very similar when we're teaching the dogs these behaviors, Free always predicts a reward, whereas come becomes a command and it doesn't always predict a reward. We use rewards, we use that concept of continual reinforcement in the very beginning when we're training a dog, and we're rewarding them for every single correct repetition until it gets to the point where the dog is doing the behavior without the help of the physical cue. I've started to call these questions and answers. When we ask our dogs to do something, or when we give them a command, we're asking them a question. We're saying, do you know what to do when I tell you the command, come? And the dog looks at us because they don't know. Then we use the physical cue and we guide the dog into the correct position, and then we reward them. So we're providing them with the answer after we have asked them the question. And we do that as many times as it takes to get the dog to do the behavior when we ask them the question or present the command without the additional help of the physical cue, because now they know what they're supposed to do because we've done it enough times. We've given them enough opportunities to learn what that sound predicts. So then I also give a couple examples of human examples of condition reinforcer. So I use money and a paycheck, right? Those are conditioned to be reinforcing because we live in a society that respects and honors what the dollar bill means and what it represents. If I gave you $10,000, but I told you you can never spend it, you can never give it away, it's going to go to the grave with you. Well, now it becomes worthless. In fact, it becomes a burden because you have to carry it around and transport it with you. So it's valuable because of what it predicts. Then, as I said, we talked about Ivan Pavlov and how he renamed the word to predictability is what I said. And that was more as a way of helping you understand in the most simplified manner what this concept of classical conditioning is. Then we also talked about clickers in the video. And I used the blindfold example. So if you've been studying my videos, you probably heard me talk about the blindfold example. And what that is if I put a blindfold on you and I took a stick and I said, I'm going to take the stick and I'm going to swing it at your head. But before I do, I'm going to say duck. So I say duck, then I swing the stick, giving you just enough time to duck. But what if I did this? Duck. You get hit in the head every single time and you're not able to learn. It has to precede the physical cue to give you enough time to respond to it. So that's an analogy I've been using for a long time to help people understand this concept, because when we're getting a dog conditioned to the markers, if we say the marker at the exact same time we're delivering the reward, the dog will not become conditioned, and that's scientifically proven. It's known as overshadowing. Go on your computer, type overshadowing. If two things are presented to a dog at the exact same time, whatever is more relevant to the dog is what they're going to focus on, and they will completely ignore the other element. So dogs are more aware of physical movements instead of verbal sounds that we make. So we have to make sure we separate the two. And then, as I mentioned right before that, was using clickers. Now, this is something that people often ask me, is it better to use my voice or is it better to use a clicker? You can use both if you want. You can have a clicker when you're training, and you can also teach your dog to be conditioned to your voice. So then if you don't have the clicker on you, you are able to fall back onto your voice and use that as a marker. The two things that have made clickers very successful was, number one, the click always sounds the same. We have to be aware of that when we're using our voice as a marker. We have to be a broken record. Yes, yes, it has to sound the same. A click always sounds the same. It doesn't click a different tone or frequency one time and then change the next time. It's always the same. So it's very distinct to the dog. The next thing is, it's much easier to separate two physicals than it is to separate a physical and a verbal. It's easier for people to go click, reward. It's much harder for people to go yes, reward. Something I also talk about is make sure that you are practicing these behaviors or these training exercises without the dog. Practice without the dog. When I was a student at the Tom Rose School, I used to walk around the training building and I would just act like I had food in my hand and I would say, yes, reward. Yes, reward. Just getting myself conditioned. So then when I have the dog in front of me, I'm able to perform the way that I want and need to in order to help the dog learn more quickly. This is something I've been doing since I was in the military. A lot of you may know I used to be a drill instructor. I would drive around with my windshield wipers on and I would march to the windshield wiper. So left, right, low, right. And that would help me practice doing my cadences. So then when I had the platoon in front of me, I was able to do it at a level that I would be satisfied with, or at least continue to improve my technique. Marker versus praise, I talk about that as well. A marker is going to be, as I said before, more like a paycheck or money. It's something that you can take and go buy something that you want. Where with our dogs, the marker predicts food, toy, affection. I pretty much reserve my markers for food or toys, and the reason why is because I pet my dogs all the time, as I'm sure every one of you pet your dogs all the time. So petting usually isn't as valuable for most dogs as the food, treats, or toys are. So I like to reserve the markers for that. Now, verbal praise is great to keep a dog on track, to let them know they're doing a really nice job, to show them that you're excited and you're happy that they're progressing within the training. Dogs are very good at reading our emotions. So letting them know, hey, great job, that's awesome. That's verbal praise though. So that would be equivalent to a boss coming in and saying, hey, everyone, you guys are doing excellent. Thank you so much for putting in all this effort. I really appreciate your hard work. And that's great. It feels good, but it's not a paycheck. If that was the only thing that your boss provided for the work and effort that you put in, and he never gave you a paycheck or paid you for your work, then you'd probably end up quitting very quickly. Let's see. Okay, another thing that we talk about in the video is not pausing too long after you mark a behavior. So when we mark a behavior, we want to start to move. We don't have to get the reward to the dog, but we want to start to move within a second after we say the marker. So what I mean by that is if I say yes right after I finish saying yes, that's when the timer starts. And then we have that 1 second to start moving. So if I start moving within 3/4 of a second, but the treat doesn't get to the dog for 3 seconds, we're okay. Because the dog sees the movement. Once the dog knows the reward is coming, then we're making that connection. So we could literally do it like this if we wanted to. We can go, yes. So you can see that it came much slower than the 1 second, but I started to move before 1 second. Now what we don't want to do is we don't want to have too long of a time period between when we say the marker and when we deliver. So we also wouldn't want to do this. Yes. That's too long. So there's that fine line, and I always try to move at about a 1/2 second after I use a word or a marker. That's a good rule to follow. So another thing that we talk about is what this is called. It's known as engagement training. When we're teaching our dog the markers, it's also known as loading the markers. So we're loading them, we're getting them ready so we can use them. And some people call this creating a bridge. It's all the same thing. I like to call it engagement training because the more engaged we can have our dogs, the faster they're going to learn. And that also means that we want to stop the training before our dogs start to become bored. It's been proven that we learn, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be the same with our dogs, better when we're at an emotional state that is conducive to our learning. If you're happy, if you're having a good time, think about really amazing comedy shows that you've watched. Comedy is one of the best ways to teach somebody something. If you're laughing, you're learning and you're remembering the information. Ask most people what their memories are of school. A lot of them are going to say boring. Boring is the worst mindset to be in if you're trying to learn something new. And it's the same with our dogs. If they're getting overstimulated or they're becoming bored with the training, the learning is going to start going down and your training is not going to be as effective. Short, fun, exciting sessions are going to do you way more service than long sessions where you're overwhelming the dog and they're starting to shut down and become bored. So you want to stop when they're having a good time, when they're fun, when they're invested into the training, because then they're going to enjoy it, which is very important, but they're going to want to come back for more. And then also the time in which we reward a behavior. So this is why we use the markers, and it's something I talk about near the end of the video. The reason why we use markers, it's not because our dogs can't remember things. It's not like they forget places that they've been. Think about a place that you've taken your dog before that your dog really enjoys, whether it's something like a dog beach, a friend's house, the dog park if you like going to dog parks. Not something I recommend, but if your dog enjoys these places, when you drive to that location and your dog starts to realize where he or she is, what happens? They get excited before they're even there because they remember it. So dogs do have memories. It's just if we're trying to influence a dog's behavior, we have to let them know within that first second. You can't do a training session 5 minutes later, have your dog come up to you and say, hey, that sit you did earlier, I really liked it. That was awesome. The dog's going to just think you're rewarding him for whatever the dog was doing in that moment in time. The farther we get away from the behavior, the harder it is to connect that behavior with the consequence or the reward. It's the same with people. And the example that I do for corrections, which if you haven't heard this before, it's a really good way to understand this concept. A lot of times, the dog may do something when we're not at the house. You come home, the trash has been knocked over, maybe there's a mess on the floor that you have to clean up, and you reprimand your dog, and your dog looks fearful and worried. And people say that's a sure sign that the dog knows that they did something wrong, and they're displaying that through guilt. The analogy that I have for this is the POW analogy. Imagine you're a prisoner of war in a country where you don't speak the language. You're in a cell, you have the toilet, you use it every day, there's never been an issue. One day you're bored, you start to carve on the wall, the guards see you carving on the wall, they run in, yelling at you, hitting you, and shoving your face into the toilet, using a language that you don't understand. You don't know what they're saying, but you know they're upset, and you know that they're punishing you physically, shoving your face into the toilet. Would you think that they're shoving your face into the toilet because you used the toilet or because you were carving on the wall? You're gonna think it was because you're carving on the wall, because that's what you were doing when they started to yell at you and to punish you in a sense for that behavior. So that's pretty much this episode in a nutshell. It's a good introduction to markers. Now, I'm going to quickly go through the questions that were submitted by the channel members, and then I'm going to take any questions from anybody who is watching. So the first one was, my Australian cattle dog turns 1 next week, and we cannot seem to train her to not jump up on people. Could you go over the leash pressure training, or if you have any other training methods to get her to stop jumping on people? So with leash pressure work, that does fall under a marker if we wanted to use that as a marker. It's something that I do and I recommend. I also use leash pressure to teach commands. We can use a leash pressure if we've taught our dogs to respond to a leash. And I'm not talking about force. I'm not saying take the leash and pull the dog and make them do it. The leash needs to become a cue. It's one additional tool that we have to clearly communicate with our dogs. And the way this used to be taught traditionally, it was considered a mildly stressful exercise because you turn on the pressure and you would wait until the dog complies. The moment the dog complies, you turn off the pressure, you reward the dog. So then the dog goes, okay, if I want to turn this off, I have to go with the pressure instead of resisting it. And then once the dog makes that connection, they don't resist anymore, and you can teach them to follow the leash. You can use it to get them to walk forward, backwards, sit, down, simply by guiding them with the leash. And we can use that for commands. Remember, our commands are questions. The physical cue is the answer. It doesn't matter what the physical cue is, as long as the physical cue can get the dog to do the behavior, then that becomes the answer. Another good example is if your dog already knows a verbal command and you want to teach your dog a physical cue that predicts the commanded behavior, such as AKC obedience for the utility routine where you have to use hand and arm signals. This is the down. You go, how do I teach my dog that? How do I teach my dog that this means to lay down? Well, if your dog already knows the verbal command down, you can use that to teach the behavior. This is the question. Then you tell your dog down. Your dog lays down. Again, it goes back to that concept of pattern recognition. The dog learns every time my owner raises his or her hand, the next thing is the down command. And if the dog doesn't know the down command, then you raise your hand and then you lure your dog into the down, getting them to do the behavior. So always keep that in mind when you are asking your dog to do something, you're asking them a question, and if they haven't heard that question and have been given the answer enough times, then we have to provide the answer for them. So going back to the question, this would be a behavioral issue, and remember, we have 5 main behavioral issues: fear, aggression, destructive, dangerous, and behaviors we just don't want the dog to perform. This can fall under dangerous, and the reason why is, depending on who the dog jumps up on, it could be dangerous. If the dog jumps on a child, that could knock them down. If the dog jumps up on somebody who is a senior citizen, that could knock them down. If the dog jumps up on somebody who's pregnant, that could be bad as well. So since this can be dangerous, you can go right to correcting it. Now, if our dogs are practicing certain behaviors, just like somebody who is performing in theater, they rehearse their show before they perform it in front of a live audience. We rehearse what we expect and what we want our dogs to do before we expect them to perform the way that we want in front of a live audience. And I do like to use my marker that predicts negative reinforcement, which is going to be leash pressure. And since it predicts negative reinforcement, it falls underneath the category of a marker. Again, because a marker, in order to be a marker, it has to predict one of the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. So when the dog jumps up on somebody, they stop petting, we say wrong, we apply the leash pressure. Once the dog comes off, all 4 paws are on the ground, we turn off the pressure, and the human can go back to petting the dog. So we're using positive reinforcement, that's the petting, negative punishment, removing the petting when the dog jumps up, and negative reinforcement, applying the leash pressure until the dog complies and comes off the person they just jumped up on. So we're using 3, so it is very powerful, but it's not really going to stop every dog from jumping up. Remember, our dogs do things based on motivation, and whatever is the most motivating factor is going to be the determining outcome of our dog's behavior. If the dog doesn't mind the leash pressure and it's completely okay, which dogs usually aren't going to mind it if you taught them correctly on what leash pressure is, then some dogs will continue to practice this behavior. The act of jumping up could possibly be fun. That would be a self-reinforcing behavior. I like to call it a self-rewarding behavior, very similar to playing video games or watching a movie or doing any other activity that you enjoy just to do the activity, not to get some sort of reward or outcome. Self-reinforcing behavior. If the dog's not stopping from the leash pressure, then to get reliability, we turn it into a correction. When the dog jumps up, instead of saying wrong and applying leash pressure, we say no and we apply a leash pop. I'm gonna go grab a leash to show everybody what a leash pop looks like, because this is something that is often asked. We hear leash pop, and if we haven't seen it, we may not know what exactly it is. So let me grab a leash. And by the way, I just moved back to California, so I am back in Los Angeles. I'm currently in an Airbnb, and then we have another Airbnb, and then eventually we'll be moving into our house. So for about the next month, maybe 2, I'm gonna be in Airbnb, so you might see different locations for my filming. But here's a leash, and we have a martingale collar. Of course, this wouldn't be properly fit if this was the dog's neck. This is just as an example of what a leash pop is. But a leash pop is not this. This is something people do when they first do it. They go, and they'll continue to pull. Or it's too light. It's not this either. It's not like you're trying to crack a whip or something like that. The start point of your hand that's making the correction and the stop point is usually right in the same spot. So it would be this. That's a leash pop. That's all it is. Now, if you're using a flat collar, and we go back to motivation, if you've heard my speeding ticket analogy, every dog has their own bank account. Some are very rich and some are very poor. The more wealthy our dog is, the higher the correction is going to have to be. So for example, if you're driving on the highway, police officer pulls you over, writes you a 25-cent speeding ticket, and it doesn't even go on your record, let's say, that's probably not going to be enough to change your behavior. You're going to continue to speed. And then if we look at the other end of the spectrum, if the police officer pulls you over and writes you a $20,000 speeding ticket, you perhaps will stop driving completely. That's an avoidance level correction. It's a correction so high, you avoid the behavior entirely. But let's say you receive a $200 speeding ticket, that's enough to get you to slow down without getting you to avoid the behavior of driving. If you're using a flat collar and you're doing the leash pop, you can only do a leash pop so hard. We're not trying to hurt dogs. We need to correct them if they're doing a behavior that could be potentially dangerous, and that's why obedience is so important. It's not because we want to be tyrants and control our dogs. We want them to be able to know how to behave correctly within the world of humans. Know not to run out into the street, know to come when called, know when to listen and stay healed. These things are important, of course, for our dog's safety. If you're trying to correct your dog on a flat collar and their behavior is not changing and you know your timing is correct, then it could be possible that the correction's not high enough. This can only give you so high of a speeding ticket. These max out on like $50 speeding ticket if we're using that analogy. If your dog needs a $100 speeding ticket, you may need to increase to a different training collar. Or if you don't want to correct your dog, which some people do not, and I respect that entirely. If you don't want to correct your dog, then just stay very consistent with the leash pressure and don't allow them to practice it. It's going to take much longer, but eventually the dog will learn that this behavior does not contribute to the result that the dog wants, and eventually they will stop. It's just going to take a little bit longer. So sorry, that was a long answer to that question. The next one is, I have a border collie mixed breed who's amazing, but she's taken to running out of the house lately and I can't get her to come back. I've trained her recall on a long lead with distractions and distance, even the dog park, but when she runs off, she still doesn't listen. Any tips? If we want our dog to be reliable off leash, the only way to have true off leash reliability, now you can have some dogs that 99.9% of the time, they will stay with you, they will listen, they will do everything you need without any sort of collar at all. But that 0.01% of the time when something happens and you don't have any sort of control of your dog, whether it's a leash, long line, or any other training collar, like a remote training collar, your dog takes off. Remember, our dogs are always going to do whatever is most motivating. So in that moment, if your dog takes off and you're trying to call your dog, and your dog's not responding because you don't have anything valuable enough or anything that is motivating enough to stop the behavior of not listening and rewarding the behavior for coming back, the dog's going to do whatever they want. They're going to take off, which of course can be dangerous. As I mentioned a moment ago, running out into the street or running towards another dog that they think is a friendly dog because in their world, they've only experienced other friendly dogs, but then they go running up on somebody who's trying to teach their dog to walk nicely on a loose leash, but the dog is highly dog aggressive. And now your dog runs up and now that could be bad as well. So safety, again, we always talk about that. Safety is very important. If you want true off-leash reliability, the only way we can really do that is through remote collar training. I have a chapter in my manual. If you have it, chapter 8 is all about corrections, when to use corrections, when not to use corrections. And I try to make it as black and white as possible when we're looking at something, especially through the internet where I'm not directly with you and helping you train your dog and I'm not able to see everything your dog is doing. I try to make the information as black and white as humanly possible, but there is a gray area to dog training, and that's going to be more in detail or in line with adjusting according to that individual dog, and that's the art of dog training. And I've talked about that before, but you have to really understand and master the science in order to master the art. But remote collar training is going to be what's going to work best. Or another option is to trick your dog. If your dog thinks that once the front door is open, she can take off and go running out the front door, and now she's not listening, she's running away. One of the things that I've done with dogs like this is I will have a leash on them, and I'll have a climb platform close to the front door. I'll take the dog to the climb platform. I'll ask them to climb. Then I will take off the leash that they have on and I will hook on another leash at the same time I take off the first one. And I'll have somebody either holding it where the dog doesn't know or even hooked to a back tie. So then when I open the front door, the dog goes, this is my opportunity. It works every day. And they try to take off and the leash and collar stops them. If you're going to do that, You have to make sure it's a short leash. You wouldn't want it to be a long line because you wouldn't want the dog to run that long distance, 20 feet full speed, get to the end and then hurt themselves. It would have to be something short on a flat collar or even an agitation collar or a harness to prevent them from practicing that behavior. And then when they go to do it, the harness or the agitation collar stops them, and then you can follow through with the correction. Next question is, I have a German Shepherd puppy. How do I work with him on being quiet in the crate for a few hours? He lasts an hour tops. What if he starts panicking in the crate when I'm gone? I had a cover over it and been doing the bowl technique, but the problem is he hears me coming, since he only starts crying once I leave the room and then stops crying. He's getting better with that though. I go back to work in a week and I don't understand how people jump from crate training while at home to suddenly having to leave the puppy alone at home in the crate. Does it just transition easily, or is there a step between? Number one, and this is why our markers are so important, and this was something I was working with them. Now, the first thing is, which I don't even have this in my manual, and there's certain things I didn't put in my manual because either I didn't think about it at the time, because to me it's like, oh, first you put a blanket over the crate. That's the first thing we do. If that doesn't work, then we can correct the dog by hitting the top of the crate with a metal bowl or tapping it depending on the dog. Now, I had somebody who I was working with, they were having issues, and this was through Zoom sessions, and the dog continued to bark even though they were using the bowl technique. Now, the bowl technique, if you don't know what it is, you place a bowl on top of the crate and you walk away, and if your dog whines or barks, you say no, you walk back, you take the bowl, and you tap the top of the crate. That will get 95% of dogs to stop barking. But this is why our markers are so important. If I'm starting to walk away, now this is what the person who I was working with their dog that was whining through the Zoom sessions, they said it's not working. I've corrected the dog and my dog continues to whine in the crate, the blanket's not working, what am I doing wrong? So I had him send me a video of what he was doing. And what he was doing was he had the dog in the crate, he started to walk away. When the dog barked, he turned around, he didn't say anything. The dog barked, he did not say anything. He turned around, he walked all the way to the dog, then he said no, and then he corrected the dog. Now, the reason why that wasn't working is because the dog saw the barking as doing what the dog had assumed that he wanted to take place. So the dog goes, I want my owner to come back to me. Owner starts walking away, dog barks, owner turns around, dog goes, beautiful. Now the dog's happy and excited because the owner is coming back. The owner is doing exactly what the dog wanted him to do based on that bark. The owner gets back to the crate. The dog's happy and excited, looking up, and the owner says no. And the dog goes, don't be happy and excited? I don't understand. So there's confusion, and that's why we have to use our marker at the exact moment the dog does the behavior. So when you're walking away, the moment your dog bark, no, it has to be within a second. Then you turn around, walk back, and tap the top of the crate with the bowl. And that will usually work. So I always start with blankets first. Next, I try to use the bowl technique. And then the last option, if that doesn't work, for that small 4.9% or 5% of dogs where those don't work, a squirt bottle works. I don't like using the squirt bottle. I don't like making a dog wet. But back when I was doing stay-in trains, I would have up to 15 dogs at my house that I was rotating throughout the day, training them throughout the day. And it was in a residential area, so I could not have the dogs barking in the crate. It had to be quiet. And that's the techniques. Those are the 3 techniques that I would use, and they would always work. And if that doesn't work, the very last option would be a bark collar. But I don't like to use bark collars if I don't have to. Okay. Would like to confirm the difference between yes, good, and free. Remember, our words mean to our dogs what they predict. Now, yes, if you're talking about the markers that I specifically use, I use yes as a continuation marker. That's the terminology for it. All that means is the dog's going to receive a reward. That is it. That's all a continuation marker means. It predicts a reward. It doesn't change the dog's circumstances. This is why it's known as a continuation marker. Because if you're doing an exercise that you want the dog to continue, more often than not, this is a stay command. Sometimes heel works as well. It's telling the dog you're going to receive a reward, but we're still working on the exercise. Now, if the dog is not in any sort of commanded stay, If you just, let's say, for example, you're luring your dog, you're working on step 2 within the dog training process that I have outlined in my series and in my manual. Step 1 is engagement training. Step 2 is luring. We teach the dogs to follow the lure. During that step, we're not saying any commands. We want the dog to focus on one thing at a time. We don't need to say the command until we know we can get the dog to do the behavior. So on step 2, when I'm luring a dog into different positions, I can say yes or free. It doesn't matter because the dog's not in a stay to remain in a stay, and the dog's not in a stay to be released for the free. So either marker works. Now, the terminal marker predicts release and reward. So it's a guarantee for the dog to be released, and it's a guarantee for the reward. Now, good, there's a lot of trainers that use good as their continuation marker. So they'll say good and reward the dog. Good, reward the dog. I don't use good as a marker. I use it within my praise, and that's why I don't use it as a marker, because I say good all the time to my dogs. Good boy, good girl, good, nice job. And since I do say that quite often, for me, that's verbal praise. So always remember, your words mean to your dogs what they predict. Okay, next question. Do you have a suggestion on training small dogs? I find their size harder to work with when you tower over them. I use your suggestion to use the martingale collar, yes and free, but when you are training a small puppy that is a really small breed, is there a better way to get them to listen? I feel like I have to get down to my 5-month-old puppy's small height. She's already a bit skittish, though I took your suggestion on hand feeding her with kibble, which she really likes. I also took your suggestion on letting her win at tug of war to build her confidence because she is a bit intimidated. Any suggestions on working with really small breeds? If I'm working with a puppy, at first I always like to get down to the dog's level. Contrary to popular belief, it's not about dominating a dog. Of course, we want to be a leader. We want to show our dogs what they should and shouldn't be doing so they're safe and happy and successful and know how to navigate within our world. But we don't have to get them to do things by making them submit to us. So this is why I like to get down on the dog's level. I want to show them that I'm working with them. We're on the same team towards a common goal. Once I teach the dog the first 2 steps, actually the first 3 steps, I teach them the leash pressure. Then with small breed dogs, when I'm doing the basic obedience, most of the time I'll use the leash. And I will use it as the physical cue to get the dog to do the behavior. So I'll have the leash dangling underneath my foot. I'll say down, and then I'll apply really slow, steady pressure. Once the dog lays down, turn off the pressure, and then whichever marker I want to use or praise, and follow through with rewarding the dog. Another option which people do, there's certain trainers that'll do this, mostly Tom Rose School graduates will do this. It's a technique that Tom Rose teaches at the school, but he gets a painter's bench and they put a material that will provide the dog with traction, so not the metal as the painter's bench comes when you purchase it, but some sort of rubber or material that provides that traction. And then they work the puppy there, because now the dog's at your height. You want to make sure the dog doesn't fall off, because that could be bad and it could cause confidence issues. But that's a good way to work the sit, down, and stand, your static positions, without having to bend over. But I like to work those basic commands on the ground, and when I'm working a small dog, I use the leash quite a bit. And remember, it's not force, it's not leash force. It shouldn't even be called leash pressure. Leash cue. We're using the leash to cue the dog to tell them what we want. And that's what has worked best for me, properly using that leash. So if you haven't seen my leash pressure episodes, I recommend watching those and see how I use it underneath my foot. I'm not stepping on the leash and pulling the dog down. I'm using it to cue the dog, so when they feel that, they know that it's a cue to do the behavior that we want. Okay, let's see what's next. I let my 10-month-old Doberman on the couch anytime. He loves it and sleeps on it every night. However, when we sit on the couch, he is overwhelming us with painful love and headbutting and walks all over our bodies with affection. Is there a way for us to coexist on the couch and to teach him to be softer with affection instead of just pushing him off to the floor when it becomes too much? If you allow your dog on the furniture, it's good to show them their place to be on the furniture. If you let them walk around however they want, that's what they're going to do. And as long as that doesn't bother you, that's fine. Again, it's not an issue unless it becomes an issue. It's okay to have your dogs on the furniture if you're okay with your dogs being on the furniture. If I'm going to have a dog on the furniture, I like to have a designated spot for them so they know that this is their place. And if I want to go sit next to them or pet them or invite them to me, then I can do that and I can pet them and have them, in a sense, snuggling. Some dogs, their personalities can be a little much. It can be a little overwhelming. Have you seen any of the videos where I have Charlie, my lab? He is so happy to be around people that he can't stop moving his head or body. And with him, sometimes I have to tell him, like, go lay down and relax. You're a little much right now. Ari can just lay and not move at all. Now, this often will change as the dogs get older, but that's not a guarantee either. So showing them where you want them to be, and then if you want them to move from one position of the couch to the other, teach them to get off of the couch and then to go on the next position. And always being consistent with what we want and what we expect will help with that, so the dog isn't so overly excited. 14-week-old German Shepherd, how to teach her differences when someone approaching from the front door to bark once and then stop. Kind of let her know that she needs to be proactive and when to stop. So, okay, barking, having our dogs bark inside of the house. A lot of times people want their dogs to bark if there is the possibility of an intruder or a threat. They want the dog to alert them. This is, one of the benefits that humans have been receiving from dogs for I don't know how long. I mean, it's part of the reasons why they became, I'm going to mess up the word right now. But why they've become domesticated was really because of the benefits that we provided for them and the benefits they provided for us. And one of those was security and giving us an early alert. One of the easiest ways to work with this is to teach the dog a quiet command. Now, there's videos out there on teaching the quiet command, and often the videos show the trainer or the handler teaching the quiet after teaching the bark. So they teach the bark, they reward the dog for barking. Once the dog stops barking, they say quiet, yes, and then they reward the dog for being quiet. From my experience, this really doesn't work. It doesn't work that well. The fastest and most effective way to teach the quiet command is to treat the command quiet as a conditioned punisher. So the same way you get a dog conditioned to a no, again, if we're going back to the leash pop, it would be no, correction, no, correction. So the dog becomes conditioned as no being a correction. You do the same thing with the quiet command. The dog barks, you go quiet, correction. The dog barks, quiet, correction. And once a dog's quiet, good, nice. So you look at it and you go, that's the exact same thing as the conditioned punisher. It's the same thing as the no. The difference between the two is the same as the difference between the terminal marker free and the come when called that we discussed earlier. The no always guarantees the correction. The quiet stops guaranteeing a correction once the dog becomes quiet on the command quiet. So the dog barks, quiet, correction. The dog barks, quiet, correction. The dog barks, quiet, and then the dog stops barking. Now the dog knows that quiet means to stop barking, and now you don't have to correct him anymore. And if the dog continues to bark after they know the quiet command, then you have two options. You can say no and correct him for not complying to the quiet command, or you can do a technique known as 3 times and a freebie. And what that means is once the dog knows the quiet command, you've gone through the process, the dog barks, you tell your dog quiet, and the dog chooses not to be quiet. You go, okay, you ignore that one, kind of pretend it didn't happen. Or if the dog continues to bark in that moment, the dog's not being quiet, you go back to 3 automatic. So the next 3 times you give your dog a quiet command, you do an automatic correction. On the 4th one, when your dog barks, you go back to freebies. The dog barks, you say quiet, the dog stops barking. Now the dog is back on freebies. And the dog will stay on freebies until your dog decides not to listen to the quiet command. That's one of the fastest, most effective ways of teaching the quiet command, and it's really good for inside the house. For if the dog barks, you can tell him quiet, dog's quiet, great. Okay. My now 4 to 5-month-old border collie is starting to get a little mouthy and semi-aggressive during training. We have been struggling with motivation recently, so I kind of used it to get him more engaged in the training with me. Is this a bad thing? Will it progress to something negative, do you think? Or should I keep using it? So what I think you're talking about in that question is you're allowing your dog to play mouth at you. I don't see that as being an issue, but if you reward it, then it can become an issue. Now, it also depends on the dog's circumstances and the types of situations that the dog is going to be in. If I have a dog that I know is going to be around kids, if there's kids in the household, then I recommend not doing that, because you don't want the dog to think that he can play or she can play in the same manner with the kids as the dog is currently playing with you. If there's no kids and you're not worried about it, it should be okay. But the dogs do see it as something enjoyable, something fun, and they'll want to practice it. It's something I used to always let Ari do. As a puppy, she'd run up, she'd bite my arm, I'd play with her, and it was part of our play. And it taught her bite restriction, and it increased the bond that we have. And she knows to stop that if I say all done. There's certain things that trigger it. If I tell her, there's a certain command that I have. If I say this command and I run away from her, she'll run at me full speed, jump up, bite my arm, play for a minute, and then I say, all done, and she walks away instantly. Sometimes a dog will offer that up as well if they really do enjoy it. So really, to answer your question, it depends on you. If it starts to become a problem, then it could be a problem. If it's something that you don't want to have to deal with in the future, if you don't want the possibility of it being a problem, or if your dog is going to be around children or even someone who might be a little bit older, someone who's on blood thinners or has very thin skin, that could be a harmful behavior. So really, it's going to be situational, but yes, it can turn into something bad if you continue to practice it and your dog thinks it's okay to do it to somebody else who's not part of the game. That's really where the issue comes in. Now, dogs do become situational. They learn who it's okay to do certain things with, who they need to listen to, and who they don't have to listen to, but they'll also test their boundaries as well. So if a dog thinks that's fun, that's an okay play behavior, they may think that's an okay play behavior to do with someone new that they've recently met, and it could make the person uncomfortable, it could scare them, and then their reaction is going to have a negative impact on that dog as well, because now they're seeing this fear or they're seeing these other things being triggered from the human's emotions. So I know that's a long explanation to the question, but something like that is very complicated and it's more situational. If you want to be safe, then don't allow them to play bite. But if you have a puppy that's just teething and it's not part of the active play, that usually will go away at around 6 months. They will, once they're done teething, they'll stop mouthing. If the mouthing becomes a game, then it will continue on beyond that point. So a lot of times people ask me if it's okay to let their puppies mouth on them. I've always let puppies mouth on me. I never worried about it. They mouth on your arms, your fingers, whatever. I've never seen it as an issue, and they always grow out of it once they're done teething. But for dogs that I've made it a game, it continues beyond that 6-month marker. So those are just things that you have to keep in mind. Could it confuse our dog that I use a clicker and my voice as a same marker? Yes, depending on the situation. Okay, so is it okay to use a clicker for a continuation marker as well as a verbal yes for the continuation marker? Will that create confusion for the dog? Nope, that's perfectly okay. I talked about it earlier in this episode. It's fine. You could have 5 words that all predict the same reward to your dog, and you could use them interchangeably. It's fine. Dogs can learn more words than what we give them credit for. So that's completely fine. It's actually something that I recommend for people when they're using clickers, because you're not always going to have a clicker on you. So it's good to have that verbal marker to fall back on. Can a dog be trained to multiple people? Meaning, can both my wife and I condition the dog to our own markers? I understand the importance of always sounding the same, but my yes would sound different than my wife's yes. Yes, the dog can be trained by multiple people. It's best if everybody is using the same sort of techniques for that dog, but the dog will be able to distinguish each person's voice after they train with that person long enough. And that does go to that concept of having a dog generalized to their training. If 8 or more people work with a dog and they all use the same commands, markers, training techniques and styles, then the dog is going to learn, okay, I have to listen to everybody. I have to respond to everybody, and they're going to be able to notice the difference between the human's voice. If only a couple people are training a dog, the dog will be able to learn more quickly with the second person after the initial training's been done. If you're training at the same time, make sure that you're both training as consistent as possible with the same sort of rules and rewards and concepts that you're using, so it's consistent with the training. But to answer your question, yes, your dog will be able to distinguish the different markers and the voices. Okay, so those are all the questions that I had from the members. So now I'm gonna pull up the live video where people are asking questions. And I'm gonna scroll up. Hi Nate, what's happening, Brian? All right, tips for rescuing a 1-year-old adult German Shepherd dog. Realistic expectations given it's beyond the socialization window. So if you're rescuing a German Shepherd is one of those breeds that there are a lot of different lines. So it's been such a popular breed that you're going to find working German Shepherds, you're going to find pet German Shepherds, you're going to find show German Shepherds. And what I mean by pet German Shepherds is they weren't trained for working or for show. They were trained to specifically be family pets. So that's going to depend. And then it's also going to depend on the dog that you have and that dog's past experiences. It's important if you're rescuing a dog, a lot of times the volunteers at the shelter, or if you're at a rescue, they know a lot about the dog. So it's good to ask them questions. There's a video that I did with Bethany that I recommend watching where she talks about getting a dog from a breeder and she talks about rescues and shelters. It's a very good video. It's worth watching. Bethany is awesome, and I'm going to be doing some more videos with her soon. So those will be coming up as well. But I would ask the volunteers or the people at the rescue what they think about the dog, what they've seen, the personality traits and characteristics. And then when I evaluate a dog at a rescue or a shelter, I like to see how interested the dog is in humans. So a little technique for that is you can just sit down and have the dog on a leash and just allow the dog to do whatever the dog wants to do. If the dog is trying to be more engaged with you, the dog is interested in you, the dog wants to be pet by you, that's going to show that the dog has more interest in people. If the dog is trying to check out what's over there and who walked in that direction and is that a squirrel and did I just see a car move, then the dog is going to have less interest usually in people. That's a common technique that a lot of people will use. I like to see if the dog is interested in food. I like to see if the dog is skittish or reactive, fearful. These types of behaviors are going to make it more difficult when working with the dog. Now, if it's in a shelter, shelters can be such extreme environments that you will see one sort of dog at the shelter and then 2 weeks later at your house, totally different dog. I've seen dogs cowering in the back of their run at a shelter, afraid of everything. And then 2 weeks later, completely different dog, just because the dog was no longer in that environment. Okay. Thank you for your video information. Okay, thank you, my pleasure. Tips to get my puppy more interested in her kibble. While training outside, she still takes the treat, but isn't responding to yes every time like she does it in the house. That's because now you're competing with other motivating factors. It's one of the reasons why if you watch pure positive dog trainers on YouTube, when they are taking the dog out on a walk, you'll see they take very high value rewards. They're taking the highest value reward that they can possibly find for that dog because they want that dog to be interested in them, because now they're competing with all these new motivating factors within the environment. Your dog looks at their environment and tries to find things that are of value to your dog. So now you're going out, you're outside, you have the wind blowing, you have squirrels, you have birds chirping, you have kids on skateboards, bicycles, people walking, cars honking, all these different elements in the environment that are creating distractions that are different motivating factors. So it's not uncommon to take a dog out on a walk and offer the dog the standard treat or kibble that you've been using and for the dog not to be interested. That's very normal. There's been dogs that I've trained where I start taking them out on walks and I stopped using their food or their kibble during the walk because they weren't interested. And then I was using leash pressure and petting and praising them. You can increase the reward if you want. You can start offering your dog freeze-dried dog food or something of higher value to try to intrigue your dog's interest, which reminds me, don't forget, we have new freeze-dried dog food. You guys get a bag, you're supporting the channel. So if you order a bag, I definitely appreciate it. And that dog food is, if you're interested, I didn't make the dog food myself. It's freeze-dried dog food. If you're familiar with white labeling, you can look it up, see what white labeling is. We have this food made by Carnivore Meat Company. Carnivore Meat Company is the same company that owns and makes Vital Essentials. So essentially, it's Vital Essentials in a different bag. So you're buying Vital Essentials salmon when you're buying ours, but you're supporting the channel. So I appreciate everyone that orders. You just go to ariandcharlies.com and order a bag there, and it's very, very much appreciated. Where was I? Okay, so training outside, what I meant to say was you can start using a higher value reward if you want, or you can do what I often do, and I'll offer it to them. If they don't want it, no problem, and I just train without it if that's what it comes down to, because I don't want to really greatly increase the dog's pay grade, because then it's going to lower their motivation on the kibble, but each dog is different. That's something important to keep in mind as well. So read your dog. If you have a dog like Charlie, it doesn't matter if I give Charlie steak from a 5-star restaurant, he's still gonna love his kibble. He's still gonna love that for training. He's still gonna love the freeze-dried dog food. There's other dogs, you give them a piece of steak and they don't ever wanna touch their kibble again. All right, I am becoming a dog trainer, and when I found your videos, I've learned a lot from you. Thanks a lot. It's my pleasure. I'm happy to be able to help. And that's something that's important. And it's something, so if you're working on becoming a dog trainer and you're studying a bunch of different dog trainers, you are on the right track. One thing that I personally cannot stand about any industry is when somebody in that industry has contempt for somebody else within the industry. The minute you close your mind off to learning is the minute that you start to slow down your progress and basically stall in one position. Just like Seneca said, if you study Stoic philosophy, I study other philosophers like a spy in enemy's camp. We can always learn from other people. So being open-minded, remember our brains are a lot like a parachute. It only works when it's open. So I think it's great that you're studying as many different dog trainers as possible, and I'm very happy that my videos have been helpful. How would you click, mark, and train the quiet command or not to bark? So I think that question probably came through before I talked about the bark, so use it as a condition correction. Once a dog learns that barking means to be quiet, then it's now a command. Best teacher on the planet. I don't know about that, but I really appreciate that, Kevin. Is there a way to use a clicker to get my puppy to stop biting me? Now, if you're using the clicker as a condition punisher, then yes, you can use a clicker to teach the dog to stop biting you. The click means a correction. If your dog enjoys biting you and then you want to click your dog's behavior when your dog or your puppy stops biting you, so your puppy's biting you and your puppy stops and you click, well, you're rewarding your puppy for stopping the behavior of biting your hand, but it wouldn't stop the biting of your hand. Because biting your hand is going to be, as we talked about before, a self-reinforcing behavior. The behavior itself is fun. And so the dog's going to continue to do it. If we click when the dog stops doing it and we reward them, that would be the same as trying to get a teenager to stop playing video games by giving the teenager $5 once he stops playing. It doesn't mean he's not going to go back and play the game again later, because playing the game is fun. So you have two main options. Stop the behavior once it starts, using leash pressure, negative reinforcement, not allowing the puppy to do it, removing them from that area, or correcting them from doing it. So those are going to be the two ways to stop it. It's fine to redirect the puppy to something else, especially during that time they're teething. If your puppy goes to bite you and you give your puppy a tug toy or something else to teeth on, that's fine. You're redirecting, you're giving your puppy another option. Now, it doesn't teach them not to bite your hand, because your puppy sees it as, this is something fun to bite, that is something fun to bite. So then if the second item's not there, your puppy will go back to biting your hand because that was fun. So again, you either stop them, you prevent them, give them a different option, or you correct them. I like to, if I don't want them to mouth me, I've talked about this before, I let puppies mouth. It usually goes away at 6 months. But if I don't want them to, if they have really sharp teeth, then I like to redirect them, give them something else to do that to, and not my hand. So that's a good option. It's my pleasure, Kevin. Click that like, thanks, I appreciate that. Is there any tips on training larger dogs like German Shepherd, Husky, Golden Retriever, Doberman? Okay, training larger dogs, training smaller dogs, it doesn't matter what kind of dog I'm training. I always do the same process. It works on every dog. That's why I've developed the step-by-step process. Now, the step-by-step process, like engagement training is not gonna work on a dog if that dog is not interested in the food. If I bring a dog out and I only have one type of kibble and that dog is not interested in that kibble, well, I can't do the engagement training. I don't have any other options. So we have to make sure for engagement training, this goes back to that art of dog training. I have to make sure the dog wants what I have. Reward-based training is limited by how much the dog wants the reward, which that does bring me to something else that this was asked through an email. Person was trying to find somebody local as a dog trainer, and they were asking, is it okay to hire a pure positive dog trainer? And a lot of times you might hear a balanced dog trainer or a traditional style dog trainer will say, no, you're wasting your money by hiring a pure positive dog trainer. I disagree with that. And here's why I disagree. What is it we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to train our dogs. We're trying to teach them behaviors. If you hire a pure positive dog trainer to do a board and train, let's say, and that dog is interested in food and interested in toys, so that pure positive trainer can use these to train the dog. That trainer, if the trainer's good, he or she is going to be able to teach a sit, a down, a come, all these different commands. They're going to be able to teach the dog the commands, but they're not going to be completely reliable. And you may say, well, that's a problem. I want my training to be reliable. You can have them teach the behaviors, and then you as the owner can reinforce it. So the hardest part is not correcting a dog. That's the easiest part of training. The hard part is teaching the dogs what to do and to do it consistently when we give them the commands and get them to understand to work for rewards, to work to turn off pressure. And then once the dog knows it, so when I'm teaching a dog through obedience, I don't correct them until the dog knows everything. And if you've done the training correctly in the beginning, if you've given the dog enough time to learn, if you've done enough repetitions and the dog's confident and capable, when you start adding corrections, you should not have to correct the dog very much. Because once you start adding corrections, that dog should go, oh, okay, I know what you want. I'm not gonna make that mistake again. And that's really a clear indicator for most dogs. Of course, every dog's going to be different, but that's a clear indicator for most dogs that you've done the training correctly when you start adding corrections based on how much you have to correct the dog. If you have to correct the dog a lot, then the dog either doesn't know what you're asking them to do, or the correction is not adequate to that dog's bank account. That goes back to that 25-cent speeding ticket. But if the correction's adequate, if the timing's correct, and the dog knows what they're supposed to do and how to turn off pressure by complying, corrections go fast. You don't have to correct your dog that much. So if you are out there and you're thinking, I'm gonna hire a trainer, but there's only pure positive, if that pure positive trainer is good, that will at least teach the dog the behaviors, then you can reinforce it. Of course, my preferred is balance. I think balanced trainers are the way to go, but there's nothing wrong with a pure positive trainer if you don't mind reinforcing the rules and expectations when you get your dog back. So going back to answer that question, really, each dog is going to be based on the dog and not necessarily the size. So if I have food that the dog likes, excellent. I can start training the dog. Now, something that I've done, so if any of you are either becoming a dog trainer, interested in being a professional dog trainer, or perhaps doing it as a hobby, you're retiring and you want to help people train their dogs. When I would do stay and train, this is something that I did because I always believe in quality. I try to deliver the best quality possible. So when I would do a stay and train, I have what I would call an adjustment period. During the adjustment period, I never charged the client for it. And the adjustment period was for the dog to get comfortable in the new environment. I wouldn't take a dog that is uncomfortable in this new environment, is a little worried, is in this brand new place, their owners are not there, and the dog's stressed out. I don't take that dog and start working with them right away. The first thing that I do is I build a relationship with the dog. I bond with the dog. I get the dog comfortable. I've had a dog take 2 weeks before to get comfortable in my house. And then after those 2 weeks, that's when I started the actual training. And the reason why I wouldn't charge owners for that is because I wouldn't want them to think I'm taking advantage of them. I wouldn't want them to think like, you did 2 weeks of this transitioning period or adjustment period, you're ripping me off. I didn't want them to think that. I want them to know that It's for the dog. And the reason why we do that, the reason why we don't train the dog right away is because if we train a dog when they are stressed out, when they're anxious, when they're nervous, uncomfortable, then that's going to be the feeling that the dog associates with the training. And if our dog associates those feelings with the training, the dog's not going to enjoy the training. They're not going to learn as fast, and it's going to take you significantly longer, and the results will never be as good. So I would have that adjustment period. Once the dog is comfortable, then I start doing that engagement training. If I start doing engagement training, the dog's not interested, and this is something it would be dependent on what the owners would want. Either we increase the value of the dog's food. So if I was using kibble and the dog isn't interested in taking the kibble, then okay, we can try freeze-dried dog food or something else that the dog wants. Or, and I received a negative review on my book for this, or we use food deprivation. Meaning, not you starve the dog, that's not it at all. You bring the dog out, you offer the dog the food, you go, here's the food, are you ready to train? And the dog goes, nope, I'm not interested in training. I don't want to work for that food. And you go, okay, no problem, buddy. We'll try again at dinner. Dinner rolls around and you don't give the dog any food between that. Dinner rolls around, you go, you ready? Do you want to take this food? The dog goes, nah, I'm still not interested. And I go, great, we'll try again at breakfast. Breakfast rolls around, I go, hey, you want this food? The dog goes, yeah, that looks really good now. Now I have the dog working for the food. Because if I wasn't willing to either increase the value of the food to get them to work for it, or if I wasn't willing to do that food deprivation for a day or two, depending on the dog, then my only other option is force. That's it. I force the dog to do it. Now, force sounds bad. It's not bad. Leash pressure would be an example of force, once the dog understands it. I can train a dog using leash pressure without ever giving the dog any food and only rewarding them with petting. I like to use food though, because from my experience, it increases the motivation, the dog ends up enjoying the training more, and we see better results. And remember, once the dog knows the commanded behavior, the responding on the verbal command, then we have to start spacing out the food. So even though in the beginning, and if you watch all my training videos, what am I doing? I'm giving the dog all kinds of food during the training. That's because it's a new exercise and we're doing continual reinforcement. But once your dog knows it, and I have a video specifically on that, it's a 6-minute short video. I think I posted it like 3 months ago. We start removing it. It's a 3-stage process. Stage 1, continual reinforcement. Stage 2, either you reward or you provide verbal praise. Stage 3, reward, verbal praise, or you say nothing at all, and you slowly start to remove the verbal praise or the food. And then eventually you're rewarding maybe one time for every 12, 13, 14, 6, 10 repetitions, or commanded behaviors rather. So I might say, sit, down, come, heel, down, sit, free, and then I reward my dog. But I always provide rewards. I never ask a dog to work indefinitely without some kind of reward. Even the ones that didn't want the food, I pet them. They're still getting something. Okay, what's next? How do you stop a puppy from biting? We talked about that a little bit. You redirect, or you correct, or you prevent. My 8-month-old cocker pees when meeting strangers. Appears to be excitement, not fear. Okay, so if you have a dog that happy pees, excited pees, there's not much you could do. I know that's not the answer you were hoping for, but when we have a dog that pees when they're excited and happy, most dogs do end up growing out of it, but it's not a guarantee. I had a friend who had a dog that would pee anytime that dog met someone new, because you can't correct the dog for that. It's an involuntary behavior. So all he would do is anytime someone was saying hi to his dog, if somebody came over to his house, he would take the dog outside, allow the dog to say hi, the dog would happy pee. Once the dog got that out of his system, then they would go inside. So most dogs will grow out of it. If your dog does not grow out of it, take the dog outside to say hi to people and then bring the dog back in. I wish I had a better answer for that one. If somebody has a better suggestion, please let me know. But I haven't been able to find one because, again, we can't correct it. Okay. Also, how would you, I'm in puppy biting hell. That's funny. Also, how would you train not barking at windshield wipers? That's going to be probably something I would correct. Dog barks, I would use the quiet command, quiet correction. once the dog knows not to bark at it anymore. You can also use that concept. Don't forget the concept of counter conditioning and desensitization. We expose it at a distance or at a stimuli low enough not to create any sort of negative response from the dog. Associate it with something positive and gradually increase the stimuli. So if the dog is afraid of the windshield wipers, then you definitely don't want to correct, because then that's going to make the behavior worse. The dog expects it to be bad. You show the dog that it's bad by correcting him, but if the dog is just barking at it just to be obnoxious, then you could use the quiet command, but that's really going to come down to knowing that dog. But when in doubt, use counter conditioning and desensitization. I have an entire episode on that. I would definitely recommend checking out. Let's see. The reward timing, yes. Reward was one of the hardest things for me to get right. Yeah, that's same. Hey, Jim, that's the same for everybody. It's something, the two hardest things that I see people that are trying to either become dog trainers or train their own dogs is, one, pairing. It's so hard not to pair because our mind and our bodies want to go at the same time. There's been plenty, even recently, where I film a training video, and then when I'm editing the video, I noticed two of the markers I paired. I was like, yes, it's gonna happen. As long as you're aware of it though, and you try not to do it, and 70, 80, 90% of the time you're doing it correctly, you're good. Now remember though, once your dog is conditioned to the sound, if you pair it, it's probably not going to have a negative impact because the dog's conditioned to the sound. It's most important when we're conditioning them to the sound. Once they're conditioned, great. Now we have plenty of time to get the dog the reward. And if they hear the sound, even if you are moving when you make the sound, hopefully the dog hears it. Now, the problem with that though, if you do end up getting lazy and you start pairing it a lot, then the dog could ignore the marker sound, and now they're just looking for your body language to move, and now that's the signal for your dog to jump up. A good way to test that out is put your dog in a sit, don't say your terminal marker, and just move as if you were saying your terminal marker. And if your dog breaks the position, reinforce it. So they know that it's not the movement, but the sound. We teach them with the movement when we're first teaching it, but once the dog's conditioned, you should be able to move however you want if your dog's in a stay, and the dog should not be able to just jump up. Let's see. Can you please say how to stop my dog from growling when he is eating food and gets very possessive with his food? There's a video that, there's another video that I did with Bethany. I can post it in the comments. Let me see if I can find it. But it's dealing with dogs that have issues resource guarding. And I think one of the things that she even mentions is alpha. We often use that word alpha when we're discussing dogs and dog training. Which dog's the alpha? Which one's the beta? Which one's submissive? Alpha in the dog world is priority access to limited resources. So if there's a group of dogs and there's one dog that has priority access to a limited resource, that would be by definition the alpha. So she talks about in the video, and I'm gonna just put this in the chat, but as I said, it's a great video to watch. Long story short, the technique that I recommend that she demonstrates in the video, when your dog is eating, why do dogs start to growl? Why do they become aggressive? Why do they resource guard? Well, because they're afraid of the resource being taken away. And if our hand comes towards them and they think we're gonna take it away because we're trying to be the alpha, and the dog doesn't want that, well, they may act aggressively. They may growl at first, but then if growling doesn't work, then escalation of force, they decide to bite or act like they're going to bite. So what we want to do, the way that I like to do it is I'll give the dog a bowl of food, whatever, and then I will present something of slightly higher value. I think in the video she used just more kibble, and she was using it with a puppy, which is great. Great exercise to do with puppies. With a dog that might be older, I might use a slightly higher value reward. So let's say the dog's eating their kibble. I might have a handful of freeze-dried dog food, and I'm gonna slowly move it to the dog, slow enough to where they see my hand coming, and they see the food, and they smell the food, and they realize I'm adding value, I'm not taking away. Then I give the dog that food. So now I'm showing my dog, when I bring my hand to you, that doesn't mean that I'm going to take away what you have, but rather I'm going to add value to what you have. And now we have a dog that sees the hand coming and goes, awesome, you're gonna give me more food, you're gonna give me value. This could take a lot of repetition, but it's definitely an exercise worth doing. I still wanna share that video if I can find it. It's crazy how many videos I have now on this channel. You know what, I think I'm just gonna post it later because I can't find it right now. Oh, here we go. How to stop puppy resource guarding, perfect. Okay, so I'm gonna copy and paste this. There we go. Okay, cool. What's next? For puppy biting, I jerk back and yell, ouch. Seems to have worked. That can work. So that goes back to always remember the science of dog training. If you do a behavior, and this is why not every technique works on every dog. Actually, I don't know if there's any technique that guarantees to work on every dog. Now, there's a process that works on every dog, but not techniques that work on every dog. So a good example is dogs that jump up. A common technique is to cross your arms, turn, and ignore the dog. This works on a lot of dogs. This will work on a dog. If the dog's only goal, the only reason why they're jumping up is to get your attention, and as an effect of them jumping up, you ignore them, now you're delivering the exact opposite of what they want. And then they go, well, this sucks, and they put their paws on the ground, and then you turn around and you go, yay, good job. That's gonna work on that dog because that dog wants your attention. And the dog goes, oh, excellent. If I don't jump up, if I keep my paws on the ground, you're going to give me what I want. Really cool. Or if I sit, you make them sit and then you pet them. But if the dog enjoys jumping up, then ignoring that dog is not going to work because the dog jumps up and you ignore him, the dog's like, I don't care if you're ignoring me, jumping up is fun. There's some puppies that will go to bite your hand and you can go, ouch, and pull away, and that puppy's gonna go, oh, I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. And then the puppy stops and you praise and pet him, and the puppy goes, okay, I don't wanna bite you. I didn't like that reaction. But there's some puppies, and I'm sure a good amount of you on here has seen this before. The puppy goes to bite, you say ouch and react, and the puppy bites you even more. The puppy goes, that was fun. I like that reaction, and they bite you more. So it is good to try these techniques, see if it works on your dog. If it doesn't work, then you have to adjust and use a different technique that might work. So not every technique works on every dog, and not every dog is going to respond to every technique. All right. I had a dog before that always got sick in the car, never grew out of it. I spent hours hand feeding the car, playing in the car, short journeys, but the dog was sick all the time, no matter what. That can happen. That's more rare. A lot of times dogs will get used to car rides. If you do exactly what you said, you do short drives. What I would do is I'd get the dog comfortable going in and out of the car. And then when the dog was in the car, I might back up out of the driveway, pull back in, and then let the dog out. And most of the time that will work, but that's possible. I mean, there are times where you may do everything correctly and it doesn't fix an issue, like the dog getting sick in the vehicle or the dog peeing when they're excited when somebody new walks in. So there may be certain things that you can do that might help with that if the training or the different processes don't work. For example, if you talk to a veterinarian, I don't like using this as an option when I'm working with a dog, but if it's the last choice that you have, then I think they do have medication that you can give a dog that will help with that. All right, puppy biting, I take away the fun. So if the puppy bites me, I just stand up and leave the puppy. Has worked on all my dogs. Yep, that could definitely work. Military death by PowerPoint, is that what you're saying? NCO school maybe? I think you're talking about when something's boring, you're not gonna learn as well. Yeah, but what if the dog is biting me while I'm walking in? You could set that up and correct. I tried yelling ouch and that doesn't work. So a lot of these are the puppy ones, and that's what we talked about. Make sure you adjust and try the different techniques that's going to work with your dog. I just wanna say thank you. Hey, it's my pleasure, Arm & Hammer. Your teaching has helped me with my dog so much. Balance training is the best. I think balance training is great. It's my preferred training style. But as I mentioned earlier, if you were to hire a pure positive dog trainer, if they are a good dog trainer, it could help you teach your dog the behaviors and then you could reinforce it. Yep, you can trade. Okay, I'm gonna answer one more question because we're This is almost coming up to an hour and 20 minutes already. We're gonna get our puppy Chow Chow this weekend. Chow Chows are cute. They make cute puppies. Binge watch your series for the past month and took notes to get ready. Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Let me know how it goes. I hope the training goes really well. Chow Chows are they're cute puppies. They have a bad reputation because they do tend to get into dog fights, but it's not really from, and this is what I've read, it's that they're dog aggressive, because I've only worked, not that many people have Chow Chows. I've only worked with a handful of Chow Chows. But they have a posture that makes them look aggressive to other dogs. So often Chow Chows are attacked by other dogs. And because of that, they've gotten this reputation that they're dog aggressive. That's not what I saw from the dogs that I trained. The Chow Chows I had, they were great, no issues. They were very friendly, no dog aggression issues. But they are a little bit more independent than some of the other dog breeds. Same as like our Huskies tend to be a little bit more independent. But Chow Chows are cute. You're gonna have fun. Okay, that wasn't a question, so we got one more. Kong fillers, are they used on top of 3 meals for your puppy, or do I have to make them part of their meals? It depends on the Kong filler. So what I like to use if I'm filling a Kong is raw dog food. I like using raw dog food. Another one is I would use the kibble. I have a video of that, and then fill it with water so it expands, stuff that into the Kong and freeze it. That's great. I would account that into the dog's meal. If I'm using raw dog meat, I like to stuff Kongs and bones with raw dog meat, then that I will also subtract a little bit from the dog's main meal, because of course we don't want our dogs to get overweight, and most people overfeed their dogs. A good thing to do is to weigh your food. So weighing your food or using a measuring cup. So if you're using kibble, always measure what you're feeding. If you're using raw, then using a scale is a really great way to keep accountability of how much you're giving your dog each day. And if you have a family and everybody is interacting with the dogs and giving them treats and training them, then take what the dog should consume throughout the day. So the dog's rations for the day, put that in one location. Everyone in the family knows it's there, and that's what you use from. Once that's out, the dog's done for the day. You don't want to overfeed them, and that's something that I've seen a real common issue with big families, because everybody's giving the dog treats and there's no accountability, and you end up having a very overweight dog, which of course is not good for their health. Which that reminds me, if you have a dog, make sure in the description of all my videos, I do have the one of the sponsors for my channel, Prudent Pet Insurance. I use them. If you don't have pet insurance, definitely check them out. They're great, and this was just a shout out for them because they've helped me. We had one issue, $1,500. I mean, they took care of it like that. It was great. All right, I'll do one more. I know I said that was the last one. Is there a remote collar that you recommend? I like Dogtra. I like the Dogtra Arc. E-collar Technology has some really good ones. And then if you saw the interview that I did with Jacob Placencia, I did that a few months ago, I think. He talks about a dog collar brand. Let me see, I'm gonna pull the video up. Chameleon. So Chameleon, I haven't personally used Chameleon, but based on what he said, it seems like a really exceptional collar, but it's just like anything. You get what you pay for, and that's one of the most expensive ones. I think he told me it's around $800 for a Chameleon dog remote training collar. Dogtra is between $175. You might be able to find one of their cheaper collars up to around $450. And then e-collar Technology is very similar as far as prices with Dogtra. It's gonna come down to preference. One of the things that Chameleon had that he was telling me about was the collar will let you know if it's actually correcting the dog. So with Dogtra and e-collar Technology, you'll know when you're pressing the button because the light on the collar will indicate, but that doesn't mean that it's actually making contact with the dog. The Chameleon collars will let you know if it's actually making contact and the dog is receiving the correction. That's not usually an issue if you're working short-haired dogs. Short-haired dogs, it's very easy to make sure that the connectors are touching, no problem. But if you're working with dogs that have thicker coats, so your Huskies, your German Shepherds, your Chow Chows, these dogs that have really thick coats, that's much more difficult because it's hard to get through that thick coat. And they have certain connectors that are designed specifically to make it easier to get through that. And what I do when I put the collar on, I go up and down on the dog's neck to make sure that it gets through that coat and it's connecting, which is important. So those are the three main ones. There's also Garmin. Garmin's a little bit more expensive, and I don't like that one as much as Dogtra and e-collar, but Dogtra is usually my go-to. So that's it for today. We're gonna be doing another one of these videos, something else that I'm gonna do as well besides my own. So I'll probably do about 5 of mine and then 1 of another dog trainer's video. So if there's any dog trainer videos you wanna discuss or you want me to discuss on this channel, let me know in the comments. It will not be, don't expect me to do a video on another dog trainer's video as a way to bash on the dog training. I will only point out things that I like, that I agree with, that are valuable. It's not to talk down on other dog trainers, but I think discussing other trainers could be very valuable. So if there's any certain videos that any one of you would like me to discuss in one of these, I'm gonna try to do one of these almost every day as long as my schedule allows for it. And I'll try to post within a day or so before doing it. So there's gonna be a lot of these. If you're a channel member, you have priority to the questions, just like I did today. But try to keep the questions related to the video that we're going to be discussing. I want it to be directly related to that video, and then afterwards we can discuss anything else that anybody else might be having questions on. So I wasn't able to get through all the questions. It was a lot, but thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the channel, and I will see everybody in the next video.